So why don't our leaders read history? Why do we always accept the narrative laid down for us by our presidents and our prime ministers and our generals and our journalists? When I realized that Tom Friedman is supposed to be the frontier of journalism, I despair. I should add that Tom charges now a minimum of $65,000 an hour for lectures. I charge nothing, but I would pay $65,000 an hour not to listen to Tom Friedman. I cannot understand. I can't understand how we got to this point. I remember I was crossing the Atlantic on 9/11. Of course, the plane turned around when America closed its airspace. But I fly a lot to America, on average every 3.5 weeks, to lecture, give talks, and report, and so on the Middle East, of course. And I know most of the crews on the plane. And I was talking on the satellite phone from the plane to my office on 9/11, after we took off. And before I boarded, I was on my mobile, and they told me there's a light aircraft flown into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. And I mentioned this to the purser on the aircraft, whom I knew. And when we had gone up to the air, I called the office on the aircraft phone, which means I was flying business class, and good for frequent flyer points when you do these trips. But I got onto London, they said there's 2 aircraft, and they're both passenger planes. It's an attack. And then, of course, the Pentagon, and then Pennsylvania. And I went up to the person and said, I don't know who is the pilot on this flight, but I need to talk to him. He needs to know this. And the pilot came back, and all the front of the aircraft crew gathered, and I told them everything I was getting from London. And the pilot said, call London again, I want to know more about this. And we didn't know at that stage, you see, whether the planes were international flights or whether they were domestic. Of course, they were domestic, coming from Logan and so on, but in Boston. But we didn't know if they may have come from Africa or from Europe or wherever. And one of the stewardesses said, where did the planes come from? And we all looked at each other. We were flying, were we not, to America? And the purser and I went round the aircraft together, looking for passengers we didn't like. I found 14. 4 in business class. And of course, they were all Muslims, weren't they? Because they had dark features, or they were using worry beads, or they were reading a Quran, or they had a beard, or they were looking suspiciously at Mr. Bob, because Mr. Bob was looking suspiciously at them. And I realized when I got back to the front of the plane that Osama bin Laden, whom I've met and interviewed 3 times, and I believe was involved from the start, that he had turned nice, liberal, friendly Robert into a racist in about 20 seconds. And I remember sitting back in my seat, and I actually wrote my report. In fact, I didn't write it. I called London and was put over in the old-style journalism to a copy taker in Leeds, a lady said, hello, love, how many words is this, And I just dictated my story out of my head. I said, this is so terrible that it needs to be immediate, fresh, not even written down. And I said, the one question we will not be allowed to ask is why? And I also said, if anyone says that this has changed the world forever, every law and all the forest of laws that we have erected since the Second World War to protect our human rights and our dignity and our privacy and our freedom will be torn down. And sure enough, Bush said it within 24 hours. 9/11 has changed the world forever. And my reaction is no. 19 Arab murderers will not change my world, and nor should it change yours. And I remember the plane, of course, turned around and went back to Europe, and I turned on the television, and sure enough, there was this biblical horror of the Twin Towers coming down, and we've all seen it 1,000 times. And of course, because I've met bin Laden, the TV companies were coming on, my mobile was shrieking like a parrot all the time. And I didn't turn it off, I just realized actually, but never mind. CBS, ABC, CNN, all the usual suspects, Irish radio. And one of these interviews, I was abused by a professor at Harvard who should remain nameless. It was Alan Dershowitz, yes, of course it was. And I started saying, look, all you reporters keep asking me, how did this happen, right? Box cutters, tall buildings, aeroplanes. Or who? Right, 19 Arabs who claimed they were Muslims. But why not ask why? And Dershowitz said, to ask the question why is to be pro-terrorist. Mr. Fisk, you are a dangerous man, you are anti-American, and that is the same as being anti-Semitic. I got the message. You ask why, which is a forbidden question, and you're a Nazi. Hence, I started getting postcards from Denver. God knows why Denver. Nobody reads The Independent Denver, telling me that my mother was Eichmann's daughter. My poor mum, who's dead of Parkinson's by then, was actually in the RAF in 1940, repairing radios on Spitfires and trying to fight Hitler, but that doesn't matter. But this was the point, you see. It was very odd, because if you have a crime anywhere in the United States, the first thing the cops do is look for a motive. But when we have an international crime against humanity in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania, we were forbidden to ask the question why. You were a Nazi if you asked it, because if you asked the question why, you said, be a policeman, right? Your little notebook. These guys were Arabs. That means they come from a place called the Middle East. Is there a problem out there? And then, of course, you have to examine America's relationships with the Arabs, the history of the relationship with the Middle East, and, of course, America's relationship with Israel. And by and large, our journalists did not ask why. They went along with the narrative. Good and evil, they hate us because it's our democracy. You know. The people who, the murderers of 9/11 wouldn't have known democracy if you got up in bed and found it next to them in the morning. This was not what it was about. And now I find I live in the Middle East and wake up each morning in my apartment in Beirut next to the sea, and I hear the palm trees moving and I hear the water of the Mediterranean. And I ask myself, where is the explosion coming today? Sometimes it's a real one, physical, sometimes it's a political explosion. I've never seen the Middle East in such turmoil as it is now, and I see no hope. I often say to people who want to hear about the light at the end of the tunnel, when you realize and fully accept there is absolutely no hope at the moment, then you can begin to construct something that will create hope. But the false idea, we're winning in Iraq, now we're going to win in Afghanistan, for heaven's sakes. You know, I call it in my paper Iraqistan. You know, we went to Afghanistan, we won the war, then we went to Iraq, we won the war, now we're going back to Afghanistan to win the war again. And then no doubt later we'll have to go back to Iraq, or we'll be going to Pakistan then to sort that out. Endless war. You know, I think one of the reasons why there is such frustration and anger among Muslim people, and I say this frankly because I feel it and I hear it. You know, I live among Muslims, and my drivers are Sunni Muslim, my classical Arabic translators are Shiite, my landlords are Druze. My optician is a Christian. I think that part of the reason for the frustrations is that Muslim people, by and large, have not lost their faith. They still believe in God. And we as Westerners largely have lost our faith. Not all, I know. There's still a few around, Midwest, and we've even got a few in England. They go to churches. You can spot them every so often, Sunday mornings. But by and large, I think we've lost our faith. We believe, perhaps because of the Renaissance, perhaps because of the Age of Enlightenment, because we believe in secular values and human rights, we've put these more important than how we came to be here. And I think part of this frustration that exists in the Middle East is because Muslims ask themselves how they, who have kept the faith and still believe in God, should be dominated politically, socially, culturally, and militarily by people who do not believe in God anymore. I always remember Tariq Aziz standing next to James Baker in 1991, just before the outbreak of the 91 Gulf War, saying, 18 million Iraqis cannot be defeated by a computer. But he was. They were defeated by a computer. By our power, our technology, our will, our guts, if you like, the West has dominated the Muslim world. And how? You know, it was a baker in Baghdad who asked me a question, which of course I hadn't thought of asking in my newspaper. He said, tell me, Mr. Robert, why are you, by you he meant you Western military people, why are you in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, French air base in Dushanbe and Tajik capital, flies close air support to British troops in Helmand province and Kandahar in Afghanistan. Why are you going into Pakistan? Why are you in Afghanistan? Why are you in Iraq? Why are you in Turkey? Why do you have US forces in Jordan and Egypt and Algeria? US Special Forces have a base near Taman Rasset in the Algerian Southern Sahara. Why are you in Oman and Yemen and Qatar and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia? And I had no reply. I hadn't thought about that. You know, it's like there's an iron curtain. In fact, it stretches Greenland, Iceland, US forces in the United Kingdom, Germany, of course, where the Brits still are, Bosnia now, Camp Bondsteel, and Greece, and that joins up with Turkey. From the ice cap almost to the equator, we have a new iron curtain bigger and more powerful than the one that Winston Churchill spoke of in this country, that stretched from the Baltic to Trieste and the Adriatic. Why is it there? What's behind it? Russia, China, India? Why are we in the Muslim world without armed forces? It doesn't belong to us. You know, I calculated for our Sunday magazine of The Independent a couple of years ago that we now have, per head of population, 22 times as many Western military personnel in the Muslim world than the Crusaders had in the 12th century. And we are surprised at the conflict in which we're all embroiled today. I don't believe in the clash of civilizations. I think that Huntington's book was the material that comes out of the rear end of a bull, or however you have to put it in radio stations in the United States. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, I gave a talk in Manhattan very close to the site of the World Trade Center not that long afterwards, in which I said I was surprised that Muslims have been restrained towards us for so long. In 1992, I made a movie for Channel 4 television in Britain and for the Discovery Channel here in the States called Beirut to Bosnia. It was real film, 35 millimeter. We showed it in cinemas as well, called Beirut to Bosnia. And it was said to be an inquiry, why are Muslims coming to hate us in the West? And at one scene, I walk into a mosque which is on fire in Bosnia. And you can hear my voice on the soundtrack. This is 1992, and I say, when I see things like this, I wonder what the Muslim world has in store for us. The New York Times derided this as being sensationalist. When I was writing my previous book, The Great War for Civilization, I went back to all the rough cuts of this film and discovered that I walked into the mosque on the 11th of September 1992. I was 9 years out. I don't think we can really be prescient about these things, but I felt something was coming. I actually, when I was researching for the book, went back through all the interviews I'd done on TV in the States and elsewhere. I found that in 1999, I did a broadcast at the beginning of the year on CBC, live in Toronto, in which I say, and I don't remember saying it, but I've seen the tape, the interviewer is saying, but surely things are getting better in the Middle East. Israel has peace with Egypt, it has peace with Jordan, Israel's security and peace being the sort of linchpin for the whole Middle East. And I said, no, things are getting worse. There's going to be an explosion soon, I said. And I've run that tape back. What did I mean? I don't even remember saying it, but we were feeling it coming.